You inhale roughly 4,000 chemical compounds every time you light a cigarette. But here's the unsettling part. The human brain evolved receptors for some of them 100,000 years before agriculture even existed. Picture it, 50,000 years before Christ. No screens, no inbox anxiety, no scrolling through something to numb the silence. Just a fire, the dark pressing in around it, and smoke curling straight into someone's face because there was nowhere else for it to go. And at some point, one of your ancestors sat there, coughing, eyes watering, and had a thought that would quietly shape the next several thousand generations. What if I did that on purpose? This is the story of how humans learned to smoke. Not cigarettes. Not the vape pen in your coworker's desk drawer. The very first time a human being deliberately pulled burning air into their lungs, and why that impulse might be older than civilization itself. Because here's what almost nobody tells you. Smoking didn't begin with tobacco. It didn't begin with colonial trade ships or sacred ceremonies or even farming. The urge to breathe in something burning might be wired into us at a level so deep it predates the idea of being human at all. And once you start pulling that thread, the evidence gets genuinely strange. Start with fire. You can't smoke anything without it, and fire has been part of our story for a staggering amount of time. The earliest confirmed evidence of controlled fire use comes from Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, dated to roughly 1 million years ago. Archaeologists pulled burnt plant ash and charred bone from that site, not scorched by some passing wildfire, but the residue of a contained, sustained fire, kept alive on purpose, deep inside a cave. 1 million years ago. That's not Homo sapiens. That's Homo erectus, our thick-browed, small-brained cousin who nonetheless figured out something we still haven't fully let go of. They sat by fires the way we do. They cooked. They huddled together against the cold and the dark. And every single one of them breathed smoke, every day, for hundreds of thousands of years. It wasn't a choice. It was just the air. But not all of that smoke was neutral. Burn organic material, and you don't just release carbon and water vapor. You release a chemical cocktail entirely dependent on what's feeding the flame. Certain plants, when burned, release alkaloids and terpenes, compounds that interact directly with the human nervous system in ways that are, to put it gently, noticeable. Which means somewhere out there, completely by accident, some of our ancestors were getting high around the campfire and had absolutely no idea why they suddenly felt incredible. This isn't fringe speculation. Researchers have argued for decades that early humans living in dense, forested environments would have been regularly exposed to smoke from psychoactive plants, wild cannabis, various Nicotiana species, natural entheogens scattered across Africa, Europe, and Asia. And the human brain, as it happens, is already built to respond. We carry an endocannabinoid system, receptors that regulate mood, memory, appetite, and stress, and they didn't evolve because of cannabis. But when a human first inhaled smoke from a burning cannabis plant, the brain wasn't confused by the signal. It recognized it. It was, in effect, waiting. Sit with that for a second. The multi-trillion-dollar tobacco industry, the centuries of ritual, the shamanic traditions, the medicine, the culture built around a burning leaf. All of it may trace back to one exhausted hunter who sat downwind of the wrong bush and had an unexpectedly transcendent evening. Now here's where we have to slow down, because ancient humans inhaled smoke and ancient humans deliberately grew things to smoke are two very different claims, and the archaeology draws a hard line between them. The oldest confirmed evidence of intentional cannabis use, burned seeds recovered in a context that only makes sense as deliberate inhalation, comes from a burial site in the Pamir Mountains of Central Asia, dated to around 500 BC. Wooden braziers, superheated stones, residue from cannabis plants with unusually high THC content, not rope-grade hemp, the good stuff, placed intentionally in a burial meant for the dead. But ask yourself this: does the absence of older evidence mean it didn't happen earlier, or does it just mean we haven't found it yet? Stone tools survive for 3 million years because stone doesn't rot. A wooden pipe packed with dried herbs is gone within a few centuries. A leather pouch dissolves back into the soil long before anyone shows up with a trowel. Absence of evidence, in this case, is nowhere close to evidence of absence. There's also the Herodotus problem. Writing in the 5th century BC, the Greek historian described the Scythians, nomads of the Eurasian steppe, performing what he called a vapor bath, small sealed tents, glowing stones, hemp seeds thrown onto the heat, the group inside inhaling and, in his words, howling with pleasure. For centuries, historians assumed he was exaggerating. Then archaeologists opened Scythian burial mounds and found exactly what he described. Bronze braziers, heated stones, hemp residue. He wasn't embellishing anything. If anything, he undersold it. Then there's tobacco, the plant most people actually picture when they hear the word smoking. Native exclusively to the Americas, completely unknown across Europe, Africa, and Asia until contact in the late 15th century. When Columbus's crew reached the Caribbean, they watched locals walking around with small glowing rolled leaves, pulling in smoke and releasing it through their noses. His men were baffled. Within weeks, they were trying it themselves, because of course they were. But tobacco use in the Americas stretches back far beyond 1492. Chemical residue in ancient pipes places it at least 3,500 years old in the southeastern United States, with some researchers pushing the timeline back over 10,000 years, tied to early cultivation in the Amazon basin. And here's the part that should genuinely stop you. It wasn't recreational. Tobacco was sacred, used in healing, in communication with the spirit world, in sealing agreements between tribes. Blowing smoke on someone wasn't a habit, it was a blessing. A shaman smoking wasn't taking a break. He was opening a channel. Smoke was a messenger, carrying prayer upward, carrying vision back down. That's why it was so disciplined, so ritualized, across thousands of years of practice. The version of smoking most of us know, a casual thing you do on a lunch break, is largely a European invention and a fairly recent one at that. So, if the drive to alter consciousness runs this deep, how far back does it actually go? In 2019, researchers digging in Utah's Great Salt Lake Desert uncovered a 12,000-year-old hearth containing seeds from Nicotiana attenuata, a wild tobacco species, concentrated in a pattern that rules out accident. This predates any pottery or pipe artifact in the region by thousands of years, and it raises a question worth sitting with. If people were feeding tobacco into fires 12,000 years ago, what were people on every other continent doing with their own local plants at the exact same moment? Because the desire to alter the mind isn't an American story. It's a human one. Here's a claim that sounds outlandish until you look at who's making it. The intoxication hypothesis. Ronald Siegel, a psychopharmacologist at UCLA, proposed in the 1980s that the pursuit of altered states is a fourth biological drive, right alongside hunger, thirst, and sex, and not unique to humans. Elephants seek out fermented marula fruit on purpose. Reindeer in Siberia eat Amanita muscaria mushrooms, then drink the urine of other reindeer who ate them first, because the psychoactive compounds pass through intact. If that's true even at the edges, then early humans, long before pottery, long before agriculture, were likely choosing smoke deliberately, learning through brutal trial and error which plants brought euphoria and which ones brought death, and passing that knowledge down the only way available to them. Spoken, remembered, lived. Before you keep going, I want to know something. If you'd lived at that fire, no science, no warning labels, just smoke and instinct, would you have taken the risk to find out what it did to your mind? Drop your honest answer below. I read every one of them. Because there's a side to this story that rarely gets told. Smoking is medicine. The Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest medical texts on Earth, dated to around 1550 BC in Egypt, describes inhaling smoke from heated herbs specifically to treat the throat and lungs. Hippocrates wrote about herbal vapor for respiratory disease. Ayurvedic medicine in India, over 3,000 years old, describes Dhumapana, smoke drinking, a precise system of herbs, pipes, and conditions treated. Across Egypt, Greece, India, and China, inhaled smoke shows up again and again as recognized medicine, not because people were addicted, but because, often enough, it worked. And there's a final layer beneath all of it: bonding. Humans survive in groups, and shared ritual, especially a shared altered state, builds trust and cohesion in ways almost nothing else can. Modern neuroscience confirms it. Synchronized ritual measurably deepens group identity. A circle of people breathing the same smoke together wasn't just a party. It was infrastructure. It was how strangers became a group willing to walk into danger side by side. Then everything changed. Tobacco reached Europe in the 16th century and spread with a speed that should feel familiar. By the 1600s, it was a global commodity. By the 1900s, the manufactured cigarette had turned a sacred, ritualized practice into the most engineered addiction product in human history, and the industry spent decades burying its own research on cancer while marketing to children. A shaman placing cannabis on hot stones in 500 BC and an executive signing off on a cigarette campaign in 1960 both worked with smoke. That is nearly the only thing they had in common. So when did humans start smoking? Honestly, we don't fully know, and we may never know for certain. The evidence takes us back 12,000 years with confidence, and further with reasonable speculation. But the drive underneath it, the pull toward altered states, shared ritual, inhaled medicine, is almost certainly older than any artifact we've dug up. It may be as old as fire, as old as the moment some ancestor first connected cause and effect and thought, that felt different, let's do it again.